thank you for sitting down. This should be fun. Why don't you just, first of all, well, actually, let's start here. I'm going to introduce myself. So I'm Courtney English, good friend of Mayor Franklin, and she, has some stuff on our mind. And so I think we're going to have a conversation I'm very much looking forward to. I guess the first best question is, what made you want to do this? What made you want to tell your story? Why are we here, so to speak?
I wanted to talk to you.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And also, people always asking me whether I'll write a book.
Okay.
And I'm not interested in doing that. I just helped a friend who wrote a chapter about my term in office, and it was grueling. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't fun, mm-hmm. And I thought it would just be better to have a conversation with somebody like you, with you. Really to answer any questions that you might have, and then to offer whatever thoughts I have. I mean, it doesn't have to be heavily scripted. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I studied sociology, psychology, and African studies in college. Mm-hmm. So I've always been one who felt that we needed to document kind of our social history, our cultural history. Mm-hmm. And it's always better when it's in first person.
Sure.
As opposed to people guessing what your motivation was or what was on your mind at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think it's incredibly important to tell your story. So I'm definitely honored to be a part of the journey, so to speak. So let's start at the beginning, right? Like, how'd you get here? How does one become you? Let's take us back to Philly, if you will, right?
Good old Philadelphia.
Yeah. Take us from Philly to Atlanta. Like, what was that journey like?
My journey from Philadelphia to Atlanta was really short when you really think about it, mm-hmm. because I was in my late 20s when I came, mm-hmm. and that now is 40 years ago?
Yeah.
45 years ago. Mm-hmm. So when you think about my whole life, most of my life is in Atlanta. Mm-hmm. So I left home at 17 to go to Howard University. Mm-hmm. I graduated in January of 1963. And in those days, if you have a spring birthday, you went to school in January.
Okay.
So they were A-B sessions of the class. So I was in 11A, mm-hmm. and 11A graduated in January 1963. And my mother and father were Howard alums, mm-hmm. and my mother had family in Washington. And her position was that I was only going to go to college where she had family, and that was Washington. And fortunately, Howard University accepted me. So I get to Howard, and there's a lot going on in January 1963. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I was excited about it. I was mostly an observer. Mm-hmm. Some people try to say I was an activist. I really wasn't. I was intellectually curious, mm-hmm. but too chicken to do anything about it.
Uh-oh. Yeah.
So one of my classmates was Cleveland Sellers, mm-hmm. Bakari Sellers' father. Mm-hmm. And he was a founding member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And I knew him through class, but I knew him also because my girlfriend was dating him.
Okay.
So I got to know him really well, and he, of course, at the time, it was Stokely Carmichael Secretary, was a junior at Howard, and there were other people who, one of our professors was Ackland Lynch, and Julian Bond came to speak, and all of this was in my first year or two at Howard, and it was really very exciting. Yeah. What's most interesting is there weren't many people who were showing up for those meetings, maybe 15 or 20 people.
Wow.
Most students were busy, with their own affairs. Mm-hmm. And a few students worked, but not many students. So even though I had read about the Civil Rights Movement and it had been a conversation at the dinner table, and I listened to my parents and grandparents debate whether civil disobedience was the right approach or whether the legal challenges to the law were the right approach, and I'd heard about some things at church from the minister. It really wasn't till I got to Howard that I realized that these were real life people. These were people just like me who were trying to make this big change. And I became completely fascinated by the courage they displayed. And I still draw a lot of inspiration from those young people that I met, you know, in 1963, 1964.
Did that, so I'm thinking about 1963, 1964, student at Howard. I'm thinking, so were you there? Were you a student at Howard for the March on Washington?
I was a student at Howard for the March on Washington.
Yeah.
And the students were going to march. And my mother called. We had in the dormitory, we had a payphone at the end of the hall. And I talked to my mother about every other week or once a week. And she told me she was coming to the March on Washington and that I would be going with her.
Okay, right.
So instead of going with my friends, I went with my mother and my aunts and my cousins to the March on Washington. And that really is the reason I was there the whole time, I'm sure. I don't know what my friends did.
Yeah.
But my mother was not leaving until they pulled the curtain down, so to speak. So we were about halfway up the reflecting pool.
Wow. What was that day like?
It was a wonderful day. It was an eye-opening day. The march was fully integrated generationally, racially. Everyone was marching and calm, and I remember we took sandwiches, you know, wrapped in what was then wax paper. There were no concession stands. I don't remember that there were restrooms, although my mother's sister said there were restrooms. I don't remember that part. But we just sat on the side in the grass and sang and listened. And I was excited at the time. Before I went to the march, I was really excited to hear John Lewis because he was in his 20s and he was closer to my age. Now, mind you, Dr. King wasn't much older either.
Right.
But I knew the members of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating
Those were your
Committee.
peers?
Those were my peers, so I was like thrilled. And I knew that, you know, there was questions about how radical he would be in his speech. And I consider myself pretty radical at the time. I'm all in theory, I might add. No practice. And I had been on a march when I was 15 or 16. Must have been my sophomore or junior year in high school. My English teacher, her name was Dr. Faust. And she was the political director of the Quaker Society in Philadelphia.
Okay.
And I saw her on television on the newscast. And she was leading a march on the Pentagon against nuclear power. Well, I was one of those students who studied a lot in high school and in college, really. And every Saturday I go to the library downtown Philadelphia. So this particular Saturday I didn't go to the library. I went and met a bus, and I got on a bus and rode a bus with a group of people I didn't know at all and marched on the Pentagon.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And it wasn't until maybe 20 or 30 years later that I told my mother.
How'd she react?
She was kind of surprised.
Yeah.
And my classmates were surprised, my high school classmates. But I was curious. I was against the war. I was against war. I considered myself a pacifist at the time. I was against nuclear power. I was against nuclear arms. And that was a big march too. But I got on by dark, or shortly thereafter. So this was my second really big march. But this one was with my family. And then fast forward, I think it was for the 25th anniversary of the March on Washington, I took my children.
Okay.